So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Matt Stempek, and I'm a senior researcher at Civic Hall. And we're going to talk about how to use digital platforms to engage the public, whether that's your organization or your membership or the public at large, your movement. As Ethan mentioned, you can click twice on the slides panel to maximize them. So last year, I was commissioned to help one of these big intergovernmental organizations understand how digital public engagement platforms can promote more responsive and accountable governance. So I did an overview of the best-in-class platforms currently available for public engagement, and I wanted to share the fruits of that research, including some of the next generation platforms with you today. So we're going to learn about a subset of these engagement platforms, and I'm going to retailer them to think about the ones that help you engage a constituency. So some of them were designed to engage the public at large, like a government or a city might do. But as mentioned in the plenary today, the quarantines have made us use kind of organizing 2.0 tools to conduct organizing 1.0 tactics, which is something even the fiercest digital advocates among us never wanted. Our campaigns and our democracies are going to be sorely lacking without the face-to-face conversations and the rallies. And that's why I want to start thinking about where these platforms might help fill in some of those gaps, knowing that they won't approach the same level of interpersonal interconnection. So these platforms will help you do some of those things in meaningful ways. And they're almost purpose-built for these times of being socially distanced because they work asynchronously, so people can participate whenever their schedules allow. And they work over short and great distances. And all of the platforms I'm going to talk about today are available for civil society and campaign uses, so not just government use. My knowledge on this topic comes from years of building and using tech for political organizing. So I ran or helped run digital trainings and consulting for the New Organizing Institute way back in 2009, 2010. See if that advances, is great. I got to get a master's degree in this kind of work, this values-driven technology for communities and journalism with Ethan Zuckerman at MIT's Center for Civic Media. And I did my master's thesis on all the ways communities in the grassroots can use the internet and technology to provide mutual aid in the areas where official agencies and aid organizations fall short. And that work is feeling pretty relevant again. It was 2013 and it's feeling relevant again. Then I got to work inside a giant corporation, Microsoft, as they reconfigured that company to work more openly with civic tech communities across the US, especially in cities. And then with Donald Trump ascending, I was fortunate enough to join my friend, Jessica Morales-Roqueto, who some of you probably know, on the digital organizing team at Hillary for America. So my team there designed and operated the tools for the campaign's voter registration, voter protection apps, their entire SMS list with Lloyd Cotler, the peer-to-peer messaging platform, the online phone banking platform, and also some influencer social media efforts. I'm now the senior researcher at Civic Hall, as I mentioned, and what I do there is I build and curate the Civic Tech Field Guide, which is where I'm getting a lot of the information I'll talk about today. It's our collection of almost 4,000 carefully categorized tools and resources from all over the planet. And our goal in running this crowdsourced directory is to help the helpers, which I count all of you as helpers. Everyone building and using technology towards democratic ends, whether they're inside of government or running campaigns or inside of journalism. I think it's pretty similar goals. So most relevant to all of you is the organizing and advocacy section of the guide, where we catalog the global collection of tools and platforms you need to organize campaigns and hold governments accountable. If you're here today, you're probably interested in digital organizing, so you should spend some time exploring this section at civictech.guide/advocacy. And your own tools and campaigns might already be listed in that section, in which case you can claim them. And if they're not listed, you can add them to the guide because it's crowdsourced. So today we're looking at category 1 here on this slide, which is some of the engagement platforms, public engagement. We have about 100 of these in there, so no hard feelings if I'm not talking about your favorite one today. Don't worry, we won't go over 100. We're going to go over about 6. And when I talk about engagement platforms, I mean that these platforms truly engage people. I think social media has diluted our idea of engagement, just like it diluted our idea of friends. And the platforms we're going over today actually enable behaviors that go much deeper than liking and retweeting. And another neat thing about them is their designers have connected the software features to real world levers of power. So when we talk about empowerment, they actually mean it because it leads to a change in the world, a direct political change. And I'm calling them next generation engagement platforms because these platforms are constantly pushing the envelope of how people can engage over digital means. So everyone has upvoting and comments and polling. These platforms are exploring new angles. So things like using AI to parse huge volumes of constituent feedback that a human might have to take a long time to parse. They use nudging behaviors in psychology to encourage those in power to actually respond to constituents' communications and complete that loop. They can do things like verify a constituent's residential address to count their petition signature without exposing that data to authorities. So some of these platforms have been up and experimenting for over a decade, and they've been through several different fads of crowdsourcing and the like, and honed what works. I'm gonna split our time between open source and private sector solutions. And I think there's actually times for both. The first set were developed by civic technologists in partnership with governments as open source tools. And the second set we'll talk about were developed by for-profit social benefit corporations. The open source platforms are a good solution for organizations and campaigns that have a technical staff or access to one, because installing, hosting, maintaining, updating the platform, that requires a fair amount of technical skill and time. And in my experience, smaller groups and campaigns without a strong technical team actually benefit from some of the private platforms, which are usually hosted software as a service solutions. And their annual cost of some of these private sector platforms is actually much less than a single engineer might cost in many markets. And the price usually includes hosting, some degree of help and support, security improvements, updates, et cetera. So I think there's reasons for both. The features, what the platforms seek to improve is basically consultation and agenda setting processes. So the features they promise include, reaching more people by having more longer feedback periods that are easier to access than traditional analog ways of having feedback. They promise more diverse and statistically representative residents getting to engage, which isn't always the case, but we'll talk about that. And then also helping you administering these kind of projects understand the feedback better by validating users, by filtering what they said, by moderating content, and as I mentioned, AI to help synthesize a huge volume of feedback. They also offer better ongoing communication with people, and overall, they simplify administering a large public engagement project so that it becomes easier for your organization to do it more often and with faster turnaround times. So the value proposition of these features is that you'll have better informed decision making with more people weighing in, that you'll have more perspectives, and that you'll invite those people in earlier in the process. So a number of the founders I talked to were eager to make sure that their tools not be used to validate existing decisions. So yeah, and then that can actually lead to stronger buy-in on decisions that are made because people will get an opportunity to be heard earlier. And the platforms also offer increased legitimacy for your leadership because people see that their communication and participation might have had some effect. And we'll go over ways that these platforms actually share that. So first, two fundamentally important considerations when you're choosing a digital platform that even the founders of these platforms swear by is number one, a tech product will usually accomplish nothing on its own without the accompanying political process and pressure. And number two, software tools for democratic activities are opinionated. These founders' tools included. And the design decisions behind each of these features was usually driven by a diverse set of philosophies on what is the role of a stakeholder. So probably preaching to the choir here, but tech design is not neutral. And the platforms we'll talk about today were designed by people with their own philosophies and biases and cultural expectations of how people engage. So we'll go over some international examples as well as some that are based and focused on the US. And if you think about when you're choosing a platform, one way to think about evaluating the decisions that went into it are the affordances, which is simply a way of saying, when I'm on a software platform or a social media site, what roles are easy to play on this platform? What behaviors just aren't possible and can't I do? And I found the perspectives from the platforms we'll talk about pretty valuable and worth considering as you choose an engagement platform. But first, let's think about this empowerment word. The International Association for Public Participation, which exists, developed this scale to facilitate comparative assessment of programs like the ones we're talking about. The main thing I think it did was introduce the shared language, where we can look at the guide here from inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And like I said, not all platforms reach this empowerment stage if we judge them accurately. It's nice to engage and collaborate with people and inform people, but not every platform is actually empowering them. This rubric here was designed with broad international input to help ensure that its values cross national, cultural, religious boundaries. And it's pretty frequently cited for that reason. So I scored each digital public engagement platform that I looked at based on the degree of participation it promotes on this spectrum. So the subset I'm sharing with you today mostly perform pretty well on this scale, or I wouldn't have bothered sharing them with you, but not all of them go the full scale. So without further ado, here are the public and open source engagement platforms we'll talk about. These were developed by civil society groups with government partners, or even by governments themselves at the city level. They're generally open source, which means greater transparency. If you want to see why a proposal is being displayed, you can actually look at the code and see that proposals are being treated equally. So the first, this is Decide Madrid, and it's based on the Console platform, the Console project. Console's open source digital engagement portal, and it's truly designed to shift power to engage citizens. It was developed in Madrid, and what this platform lets residents do in Madrid is collaboratively draft, comment, and vote on legislative proposals, and actually submit and vote on participatory budgeting as well, and debate in forums. So a lot of features. And one thing that's amazing about Decide Madrid is that if a citizen proposal reaches a threshold of 26,000 votes on this digital platform, which is about 1% of Madrid's registered voters, they are required to put it up to a public vote. And if it wins a majority in that vote, it's binding. It becomes law in the city. That's only happened twice, but it's a pretty cool lever of power attached to this digital platform that you can have that meaningful a result. It's not just being consulted for consulting's sake. So it's kind of a version of direct democracy in line with the existing Madrid law, which I thought was neat. So yeah, it's been used by City Council Madrid, but also pretty heavily used internationally. And New York City's participatory budgeting actually used this platform to help deciding where that funding can go. So as an example of an open source platform, this is free, but setting it up does require some technical talent. People are excited about Console because it's shown that developers and civil society and civic tech groups can actually work together between cities and countries to develop free and open source software and compete with privately funded startups in a way that allows city governments to really own the products they're using and not just have expensive subscriptions with private vendors. So as I mentioned, you can inspect the code. You can see why proposals are being treated the way they're being treated. And the other nice thing about open source software like this is that groups working in all kinds of different contexts, political, geographic, lingual, can adapt the tools. You can pick up modules and you don't need to rebuild everything from scratch. You can use the parts you want to use. And the Console platform itself, it probably won't surprise you, is democratically governed by a network of international civic tech groups, including NGOs from the Netherlands, Poland, Spain, Germany, Sweden, and the US. So that's a quick overview of Console. Over 100 institutions and cities in 35 countries have adopted it. And some of them actually contribute back code, which is exciting because that's how you make the product better over time with that kind of critical mass of adoption. So Console, I believe, goes all the way through empowerment because it gives citizens access to those levers of power in the form of digital engagement. It's not just a way to get information or vote on something or take a poll. It's a pretty direct link. And they also use it for the 100 million euro disbursement of participatory budgeting. So there's real money attached to the decisions made on console. It's a powerful link. On the flip side, we can start talking about digital divide questions. Under 10% of Madrid's residents have registered for this platform, which obviously undercuts the legitimacy of the platform. And it would be a stronger platform democratically if more users were registered. And so there's real questions about who feels comfortable using digital tools and who feels comfortable advocating to government using digital tools. I think it's worth noting for Organizing 2.0 that Console actually emerged from a strong protest movement itself. In 2015, there was a change in city government that included really strong executive support for more direct democracy and public participation. And that political change preceded the software development of this platform. So it was designed and built by a lot of those same direct democracy advocates. And this software platform is a way for them to bring some of those values into the world in their political context. But then again, having official city support is a double-edged sword, because when the right wing took power in the city of Madrid, this platform has lost favor because it was a project of the left. So, as with other digital platforms, Console alone as a software platform will not magically generate ongoing public engagement. But the fact that some cities have actually devolved some amount of formal power to public engagement platforms and methods like this and linked them to formal power is pretty big, I think. It's also just, lastly, it's an important proof of concept that a globally diverse network of software developers and democracy-driven developers who are connected over the internet can work together to build a platform that competes with private funded startups. So that is that's Console. Just quickly scan the chat. So yeah, an example of a grassroots organization. Yeah, I think the New York Participatory Budgeting is a good example, but I can also flag, I'll have to go look on their clients page. There's definitely examples of NGOs and others using it beyond city government. And then this here is a screenshot of Polis, POL.is, which is one of several tools in the vTaiwan, virtual Taiwan process. vTaiwan is a collaborative project like Console. It's run by a lot of civil society volunteers in concert with Taiwan's actual administrative branch. And it's a popular example for public engagement circles because it considers online deliberation in new ways. The vTaiwan process daisy chains a bunch of different tools together so you can achieve what your group actually needs and not have to subscribe to one overarching platform to have everything you need. And we can't do in-person meetings right now, but vTaiwan does blend digital engagement with offline in-person meetings in a nice way. And I think the most exciting thing to me about the vTaiwan process and Polis, the reason I screenshotted Polis, is that it's focused on the fundamentally democratic work of bringing people with divergent views together. So a lot of technology gets critiqued for focusing on the individual at the expense of the common good. And Polis actually goes back to how do we all agree and get along, even if we start from very different places. So the GovZero volunteer community facilitates this vTaiwan process. And also like Console, it was born out of a protest movement. So in 2014, Taiwan's sunflower protest movement led to this kind of software being developed. And that activist community agreed, it actually got a degree of formal power with the appointment of Audrey Tang as digital minister in the country's executive cabinet. So Tang brought with her radically transparent methods of conducting government business, including these open public consultations for decision-making. So a department within the Taiwanese national government can choose to call a vTaiwan process, and so far they have over 35 times. One example I'll give you is when they were deciding, like many cities in Taipei, or countries like Taiwan, whether Uber X should be legal. and regulated, and how it should be regulated with regular drivers driving their cars, they use the V-Taiwan process to bring together different stakeholders. So in this case, they got together Uber drivers, taxi unions, Uber company representatives, academic experts, and regular consumers, and worked together to figure out what they actually agree on to come up with smart, flexible regulation. So these tools that they use, in addition to Polis, they use HackPad, which is just a way to document the process. They use discourse forum software to collect and articulate the opinions. What Polis does, and the screenshot here shows, is it maps the arguments that people have to collect opinions and actually identify overlapping areas of consensus, even if there's disagreement. That's what the dotted lines here show on the slide. Is it starts actually using machine learning and AI to cluster people based on their votes on a bunch of different statements. A statement might be, we should pay Uber drivers a fair wage and we should pay taxi drivers a fair wage. And everybody might agree on that, even if they think Uber should be illegal. The V-Taiwan process also uses some survey tools and SlideShare. Nothing too fancy. It's just the way they bring it all together in consulting the public that documents it really well, so that if anyone needs to figure out how they made these decisions, they can really easily look up the whole process and the discussions that took place in case they ever need to reinterpret the regulations in the future. So yeah, Polis also is a software product that was developed by activists, in this case, the Occupy Wall Street activists in the US. And if you're not familiar with it, participants draft certain agreement statements, like Uber X should pay drivers a living wage. And then every one of us would vote on whether we agree or disagree, or you can pass on each statement. And then the software actually clusters people into discernible factions based on all of your votes across, even 60 different viewpoints. So it also identifies the popular statements between opposing factions, which to me, it was the first time I've seen a software tool expose areas of consensus amongst people rather than just areas of difference. So in mapping those relationships, I think it leads to more productive conversations. And then the group can take that data and use it for their discussions and coming up with compromises. In the UberX case, there were over 31,000 votes cast, and they came up with a pretty flexible set of regulations. UberX would be legal, but regulated, and the government adopted them. The Taiwanese government repeated that process again about whether Airbnb should be legal in Taiwan, and online liquor delivery and other kinds of questions like that involving technology. Yeah, so it's one of my favorites for that reason. And I think the main weakness with the V-Taiwan process is that it's voluntary for governments to consult them. The government has to want to, federal agency has to call them in, to invite them in to engage on the topic in their purview. And the federal agencies can also reject the findings of this process, although they have to stipulate why they rejected them. I think that's a weakness in the powerful dynamic of using this process. Yeah, so that's V-Taiwan, and that's why it's rightly hailed in a lot of circles as a step forward, bridging the digital and traditional engagement methods. This next one is also in Spain. It's actually was originally an offshoot of the Console project in Madrid, and Barcelona, being a bit independent, ended up rewriting it as their own, as Decidem versus Decide. It's we decide, Decidem. And it's an independent participatory democracy project. It's used by Barcelona, lots of other cities, Helsinki. Like Console, it's free, and because it's open source, it might require some technical skills to set up and maintain. You can check it out at decidem.org. I know these slides aren't super rich, so feel free to click around on the websites for these projects while I'm talking. But yeah, the Barcelona City Council was involved with this, and like Console, participants on this platform will register as residents, and then once they do, they can propose initiatives. They can track and vote on initiatives proposed by others, including the city's own initiatives. And a couple of things that Decidem does that Console doesn't do is support in-person meetings, support collaborative drafting of proposals, so you can write manifestos and legislation together, And it's also very modular, so you can pick and choose the parts you want to use or not use. And then lastly, another example of social values being part of software, they actually require users of the platform agree to a social contract about using the platform for the right reasons and treating people's data in an ethical way, which is nice. So Decidim is one of the most feature-rich of the platforms I looked at. Again, participatory budgeting, collaborative proposals, and also peer-to-peer communication tools. So you don't need to go up, down through the power circles. You can actually connect with others. I think it goes all the way through the empower section of the spectrum of engagement: inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And yeah, they blend the digital and the traditional democratic activities really nicely. In addition to cities, I know there was a question about civil society groups using these tools. A nonprofit network called Fund Action uses this. And actually the Decidim community itself uses their platform to govern the community and the product roadmap and the whole kind of social side of building this together. And it's a participatory project. So basically partners who engage and contribute to developing the platform get to have more input into its direction. And that's a big difference from some of the commercial platforms where you're a customer, but you don't have a ton of say over what direction they decide to go with their feature set. Yeah, so a neat example of using Decidim was the example I gave earlier, where Decode was experimenting with a way to let people sign petitions anonymously that still certifies that they live in the place they say they do, but without sharing their personal data, in case you might imagine, a given context, people might be persecuted for that, depending on the petition. But yeah, the city of Barcelona actually appointed a team to help synthesize public proposals from the digital platform back into the traditional structures of government. And in my research, that part, that human layer translating from the digital participation back to the decision-making team, that's key for any organization that wants to engage the public. Is maybe your decision makers don't spend all day on the internet like some of us do, and maybe the formal mechanisms of power are outdated and don't map to online participation. In many cases with these platforms, they actually hired, or in vTaiwan's case, had volunteers fill in that gap to translate between the internet world and the formal political mechanisms world. So that was another interesting finding. I guess weaknesses in terms of Decidim Barcelona was that it's its flagship, but it's only had under 32,000 participants using it, which isn't a lot for its profile. And depending how you feel, the binding social contract might not be your cup of tea. But I think in this community that we're talking to today, everybody here would agree with most of the principles in that social contract about being transparent about how you treat people's proposals and not using their data in unethical ways. I don't think that would be an issue. Yeah, so it's another potent platform for digital public engagement. And communities that aren't geographically defined can use it, so not just cities. And yeah, I think if the developer community can keep building it and keep the roadmap going, it's going to be an obvious choice for groups that want to be operating in more participatory ways. Sorry, my mouth is dry. I'm going to have a sip of tea. So now we'll jump over to just a few private sector platforms. And as I mentioned, like these have proprietary code. You generally, you have to pay for all of them. And there's actually benefits to that too. It's not all downside, but these are generally social venture corporations or B Corps. So they are trying to do good in the world while also turning profit. And they pledge to work towards public interest missions. In many cases, they're reinvesting the profits back into their product. So it's not, huge dividends for investors. And all these platforms are free to the users. So if you wanted to use one of these platforms to engage your membership or your staff, you would pay to administer it, but anyone participating wouldn't have to pay. And likewise, the products are priced to reward high levels of engagement. So a citizen proposal that attracted 300,000 votes won't cost any more than a proposal costing 100 votes. You only pay based on the features that you want, and if you need additional consultation from the company or help setting it up. So this is a screenshot from Neighborland. Neighborland is a US-based company, and it's most often used for public planning processes by local governments. It's really good at reaching a wide breadth of people and over the course of a bound decision-making process. So not like a constant evolving decision-making process, but rather a set period of time. It's $1,000 a month for the self-service platform. And here's it being used in Mesa, Arizona to great effect with lots of participation. It was used by Resilient San Francisco, which was a group to help San Francisco become more resilient, and also the central market. So this is one where it's a really good way to get people engaged early in the consultation process before you've determined a course of action. And I think most of us would agree that leadership choosing to do that leads to more buy-in, more legitimacy, even if the course of action doesn't end up being what you personally wanted. Feeling consulted increases your sense of efficacy and makes you more happy to be part of that organization. So in the US, Neighborlands worked at every level of government, but also a broad mix of civil society institutions, including Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities program and universities, foundations, nonprofits. Over 3 million US residents have participated on the Neighborland platform on hosted projects. And I include it here because their partnerships with cities like Mesa, Raleigh, Los Angeles have reached an average of 65,000 residents each, with about 10% of those visitors actively participating. Those are high rates for this world of public engagement platforms. The more common scenario is you launch something and you have crickets and you're trying to get your friends and their brothers to participate. Neighborland's done a great job actually augmenting and making sure you reach participation. I don't think most of their instances don't truly empower people, but they do inform, consult, involve, and collaborate with people. But they're not tied to formal mechanisms of power the way some of the earlier examples were. And the other thing Neighborland promises is that their cost of reaching people is much more efficient than any of the analog methods. And that's a third-party study. The Metro Nashville Planning Commission found that you can engage residents for $47 per person at an event, $10 per person at a public meeting, or $1 per person on the web. So as we consider our forced shift to the web, there are some silver linings there, perhaps. I don't know how those costs jump over to the political campaign world, but I imagine the internet's still pretty efficient cost-wise compared to in-person events. So Neighborland claims a 100% success rate for approving their partners' plans, which isn't to say that the plans don't undergo significant alteration as part of this public engagement process. So one example of that in North Carolina, in Nix Park, they were consulting the public about what to do with this park. And there was a lot of public pushback on allowing revenue generating private development in the public park. And the city tabled that part of the plan because of this consultation process. So I think it's cool that Neighborland regularly achieves participation from over 60,000 members of the public in a given place, because I've tried doing things like that. It's hard to reach that level. They're also one of the platforms that uses natural language processing technologies to help anyone administering that much participation, 60,000 participants, actually cluster and parse the themes that emerge from that volume of feedback. And they say that most of their clients still manually read through all the feedback, but it's nice to know that, if you're running to a meeting, there is a way to quickly parse what are the themes that people are talking about. Another unique thing that Neighborland does that I included it here for is they work to make sure the representation of the group is accurate with demographics in that area. And they do that not just through luck and circumstance, because we know the digital divide affects participation rates, but they actually proactively do outreach to groups that are underrepresented and keep working until they're there, which can even include targeted Facebook ads to help hit representation quotas, to make sure that the sample that anyone's getting for engaging the public is accurate and not just the tech savvy, rich people participating on naming a park. So I mentioned if you don't have a tech team, software as a service platforms like this take a lot of the headaches away for, updating, security, accessibility. Neighborland and others like them, software services, are really good about meeting accessibility and equity requirements, including a way to import handwritten data, SMS and voice contributions to the platform and consultation, which I think is a nice way as we get off of Twitter for the only form of public feedback, that we reach out to more people who aren't living online all the time. And lastly, they have an API that makes exporting the data easy and makes integrating with kind of third-party applications easier. But like I said, it's a proprietary software solution. So the code is closed source. And their business model does price features like customer support as additional costs. So depending on how much of a tech team you have is how you make that decision. But the product data is openly available for anyone to look at, which I think is exciting for transparency purposes and for journalists covering public consultation processes, that you can actually, the client can't censor that. Anyone can go look at it. And it stays online after the process is completed also. So 2 more. Next up is Citizen Lab. There's a couple Citizen Labs out in the world with that name. This one is a for-profit company based in Brussels, and they serve Northern Europe, Canada, Chile. They also, the Youth for Climate.be campaign used them, which is why I want to include it today, because it's designed specifically to help groups inform, consult, engage, and co-create with their constituencies, whether that's, again, staff, membership, movements, across organizations. So Citizen Lab is best applied at the local level, where people have really strong feelings and ideas, and it's less good at abstract, global campaigns that people might feel a little more removed from. I do think it goes all the way up through empowering people, and I'll talk about why. But I bring it up here because the team put a lot of energy into improving the feedback loops on constituent input. It's an unfortunate pattern with public engagement that you collect all this data and people take time over and over again to weigh in and share with you and your organization, and it doesn't always go somewhere. Or even if it goes to somewhere important, the person who weighed in and took time out of their day to help you doesn't hear back about that, because it's hard technically to do that sometimes. In Citizen Lab, in the product, what they've done is translate that to nudges, internally assigning the communication, notifications for the admins, email reminders for whoever's job it is across different departments to get back to people, and all these other alerts that help the administrators keep engaged and stay responsive to the constituents that are taking the time to communicate with you. And that strategy appears to work because 65% of their registered users actively contribute to consultations. That's another high number for this field. That's an average of, each user has an average of 3 comments, 2 ideas submitted, and 8 votes per person. That's a pretty high ratio for digital engagement platforms. It's also worth mentioning this platform because they use recommendation engines to let people find each other and find each other's ideas and connect with each other, because it's a recommendation engine for related ideas. So not all innovation and engagement has to be in relation to you, the administrator of the project, or you and your staff. It can actually be horizontal as well, and that's another powerful feature. So yeah, they're another one that uses natural language processing. It's this emerging trend of using AI to help parse feedback, and that helps parse large amounts of citizen feedback if you're going to have so much participation, while still following up with people personally. So in this case, it's multilingual, it works across multiple languages, and the natural language processing can classify that feedback into topics. So you get data visualizations, dashboards that map what people said geographically and by category. And Citizen Lab is partnering with Nesta, which is a leading civic tech foundation, to research the effect of that kind of AI usage on public engagement, which I'm happy to see because I'm very curious what effect it might have. So I talked about they really encourage strong feedback loops between your constituents telling you something and you getting back to them. And it's really, the whole platform set up so that your constituents will know what's being done with their ideas and contributions, even if you don't implement them, which I think is a really positive feedback loop for encouraging people to, be part of your organization and movement and contribute in the future. And that's actually the organization's own KPIs, or key performance indicators internally, is about how often moderators reply to people And if they reply frequently and if they get back to them in greater depth, that's how the organization judges itself and its product. Yep. So the other thing worth noting for many of you, if you have an email list of constituents, which I imagine many of the organizations here today do have, these kinds of email lists have performed really well for Citizen Lab consultations, with 40% of an email list registering on the platform. And if you do email marketing, you know that's a very high conversion rate. I've run nonprofit email lists that are more like a 5% conversion rate. So it's great to see that people's email lists are really excited to engage and tell your organization or campaign what's up. Yeah, so there's another group where they're organized around the belief that you shouldn't do a public participation process to validate existing plans. And they actually encourage their clients and customers not to launch a process if they're not in a position to adequately reply to people that weigh in and seriously consider their ideas moving forward, which I find heartening, even though it's a business. And lastly, I'm going to quickly mention this one. It's delib.net, delib like deliberation. And it's really designed for Westminster-style governments, but there's a couple of features I wanted to show you today. They offer 3 products. One is to help decision makers lead public consultations. One is to engage people in structured conversations. And lastly is one to actually work with constituents to set priorities in scenarios where you're lacking resources. And a big example for them was the city of Liverpool in England had a huge budget shortfall where there were going to be painful cuts happening no matter what they did. And Delib was able to work with the city and the constituents to help decide, what to cut in the least painful way. So it wasn't about designing your favorite idea of what a park should be. It was about really tough decisions. But they were able to use this feature to help the public empathize with the decision makers and understand this position they're in to kind of get through that together rather than just throwing stones, which would be easy and understandable in that scenario. And one reason I think their engagement products are so mature is they've spent about 10 years building them. They were founded in 2001 and the platform's been live since 2010. So they've been used in over 35,000 public engagement consultations, collecting over 4 million pieces of response data in public involvement processes. That includes 400 government organizations, national governments, local councils, pan-European bodies. The Scottish government used Delib to consult 24,000 people on their independence referendum. President Obama's first open government website, recovery.gov, was also using Delib's tools. So it's all to say they've been around the block and they've seen a lot of crowdsourcing fads come and go. And I think when I look at their products, I see some pretty mature products that go beyond voting in polls and upvoting as a way to engage the public. By explicitly inviting the public, or in your case, constituents, to understand the trade-offs you have to make to balance the decision maker. In that case, it's this product here called Simulator. It actually allows members of your constituency to make weighted resource allocation. Kind of like if you do a role-playing game, you have 10 points to spread across all these categories, and it's never going to be enough for all the categories. That's how this simulator tool works. So there's a bit of empathizing happening with using this tool. So I'll wrap up there in just a sec so we can actually have some discussion. But I think Citizen Space is the main Delib platform. And I have one good idea that you could steal from Delib for any campaign, any organization that wants to be more responsive to the public, is that they include on every instance of their platform a prominent section called "You Asked, We Did." And it's standard, and that basically shows constituents your responsiveness, where you show what you've done as a result of the participation you're seeking to get more of. So it definitely promotes citizen ideation and crowdsourcing, but also this slower, more discursive journey that they bring constituents through, because to me, the whole practice of democracy isn't even necessarily about the final decision we reached. Even if we had some AI make a perfect decision, that's not the point of democracy, as we've learned very painfully in recent years. It's more about the collective process of our debate, our dialogue, and our decision making, where people feel like they came along for the ride in some way. And I think the lib simulator product and some of the others I talked about today are basically invented to do just that, or try to help just do that. I would still love to have face-to-face conversations and canvassing back as part of the mix. So in conclusion, some of the common success factors if you want to engage your public, however you define your public, and connect that with formal political results. The first was there's a driving political force compelling whoever the authority or organization might be to actually connect that digital participation to some modicum of real binding power. And that pressure, that political force, can be external pressure from protest movements, like in Spain and Taiwan. It can also be internal motivation, where progressive leadership is willing to experiment with these new methods to engage people. That's also the case in a lot of these scenarios. Several of these platforms require significant teams of volunteers or consultants to help synthesize all that feedback once you get it, and basically translate it back into the bureaucracy of how, things actually happen in your organization or campaign. And that additional human labor is what connects the digital citizen feedback to the real world mechanisms that I think might otherwise proceed. The real world mechanisms might otherwise proceed without the broader involvement that we're looking for with these digital platforms. And common challenges that came across the board: digital divide in terms of who's feeling comfortable using technology, who can afford it. My Society did a great study that found that in the United States and the United Kingdom, digital engagement platforms that were meant to revolutionize participation primarily attracted older, whiter, richer populations. So not the people that we really need to work to empower in our society, because they're often already empowered. And for that reason, most public engagement experts usually insist on pairing digital consultation processes like these ones with offline outreach, like workshops and meetings. And that's obviously really hard to do these days with social distancing. So efforts to augment digital platforms with mailers and SMS and targeted advertising and other ways of making sure you're reaching more people besides the obvious are really important to having true representation. So I'll stop there and we can hopefully have a discussion, or I can look in the chat here as well. Thanks. And yes, the slides are available. If you look at this session on, I'll put the link in, but also on the schedule site, the slides are there. Yeah, I'm really curious what's happening in the chat here as well. So best participatory platform to build a shared progressive policy platform, because Lucas is looking to create one tied to the 2021 city council elections in New York. If anyone has ideas for Lucas. And I know that's a lot. That's just 6 of the platforms, and we have about 100 of them on the Civic Tech Field Guide. I am always happy to answer questions about what's the best platform or tool, or try to give you a handful that you can look at. There's another question from Pablo about, is there an augmented engagement tools that include mail or SMS? Yeah, to avoid using multiple platforms. There are a couple of the platforms I mentioned today have ways either manually or automatically to basically upload that kind of data. So even if you're doing a mail campaign, it obviously won't be on the digital platform, but you can bring the feedback from that mail campaign and upload it as data so that it's all in one place. And when you get your data visualizations and your answers and your results, the offline, even workshop data can be there as well. Why did console fall out of favor instead of just being used by right-wing folks? That's a great question, Zachary. I was pretty disheartened to hear it because, maybe it's like the US, not everyone feels like democratically engaging everyone will help their cause. This is the same right-wing government that immediately came into power in Madrid and got rid of all the car bans on diesel cars in the downtown. So I'm not sure how evidence-based their decision-making was versus taking things out on a political enemy. To me, it was an important instance because a lot of civic tech tools are built outside of government. And often we respond by saying, well, government should really be building this budget simulator, or this participation tool. And in Madrid's case, they did. The government city council had developers working on this. But it was, yeah, unfortunately, a double-edged sword once political winds changed. Switzerland, that is a great question. And Francis, I will get back to you, but I was just emailing someone yesterday who's basically building a catalog of all these tools in Switzerland. So I can send you the link. Yeah, so we try to focus on the global example, but the US is definitely a sweet spot for a lot of this engagement and innovation. Recordings will be available. Let me share the slides right now, actually. Put them in the chat. Just we have a second. Google Sheet. Lumio is excellent, yes. I got to meet Lumio when I was at Center for Civic Media, and they came through. Lumio is another great decision-making tool, and it might be even more small group focused rather than mass public participation, but I might be wrong about that. But definitely worth checking out. They're based in New Zealand, and they've been used by lots of good groups, including in the US. Canadian tools. Yes, what I would do is if you go to civictech.guide/map, it's not the best user experience, but you can zoom in on Canada or any other country you care about or city and see what kind of tools are available. You can also go to the category of the public engagement section of the guide, which is civictech.guide/engagement.